Good afternoon and welcome to the second in our series looking at the 7 seismic shifts involved in moving up to enterprise leadership. I'm delighted to be joined again by Professor Michael Watkins. Michael, many thanks for being back with us again today. So last week we looked at the first seismic shift, moving from specialist to generalist. Today you're saying that the second shift is moving from analyst to integrator. So are you saying that as you move up within an organization, that analysis becomes less important?
The particular kind of analysis you engage in changes substantially, right? So typically when you're leading a function, you're driving for analytical depth in, let's say, marketing, right? You really want to understand the fundamentals of what's driving the marketplace, customer needs. You know, you may have market research teams reporting to you. You may be looking at value propositions. You know, that's the work that you're fundamentally doing. When you move to an enterprise leadership role, it's really about making sure that integration happens between those functional pieces. So you're not so much concerned about the details of the analysis as what are the implications of that analysis for the business as a whole, and how does it sort of link up with the other key pieces. So analysis obviously remains important, but the fundamental nature of what you do as an analyst, if you will, changes.
So you're saying you have to look at how those different pieces move together. What exactly do you mean by integrator? What does an integrator do?
Well, so let me give you an example. I think it's the easiest way to do it. Your salesperson, your sales VP comes to you and says, we've got this tremendous idea to run a promotion, right? And we know we can generate a lot of demand if we do that. The timing is perfect. The market is ready. You know, we're ready to go with this promotion. And you smile and say, that's wonderful, right? And then your VP of operations says, well, hold on a minute, right? I'm not sure we're ready to meet that kind of demand, right? We're near capacity in a couple of our plants. We were planning some downtime for, the summer. I'm not sure the timing is really great. There's some risk that if we do this, we're going to end up with a backlog, and you're going to generate this demand, but our customers are going to not get the product they need. That's a classic supply-demand sort of challenge that you face as a general manager, right? And so how do you strike the right balance? And each of those people is legitimately trying to do what they think is right? But it's your job to make sure that the pieces fit together. And that's what I mean fundamentally by integrator.
So does this mean that the analyst who becomes an integrator is ultimately going to find himself or herself in the role of referee, trading off different departments against each other?
So conflict management does end up playing a role in this for sure. And having good conflict management and negotiation skills, I think, is a prerequisite for being effective. What I'm a little bit being cautious with is kind of the sort of the split the baby, compromise kind of notion of this. I think that integration literally means trying to find the joint gains, trying to find the right trade-offs, the right answers here. It's not about, I'll give you this today if you give that to me, kind of between your vice presidents, right? It's helping them understand what's the best thing for the business as a whole. And yes, your idea for promotion is great, but the timing isn't quite right? So let's hold off on that for a couple months until, we're sure the operations core is ready to deliver on this. I mean, that's the kind of conversation you need to have. And sometimes it's about saying, look, I'm going to make a call here, right? And so, you can be mad at me if you want. I understand that, and that's why, they're paying me the big bucks. But I'm going to have to make a call here. Right, that's the right answer for the business as a whole.
So what do you need to get really good at in order to manage cross-functional teams?
So I think that part of it is just really understanding the core trade-offs that are being worked here. So an example in a new product development team would be sort of product functionality versus manufacturability, right? And trying to really kind of make those things mesh so that you hit the right trade-off. The supply-demand trade-offs that I was talking about are another. Innovation and execution. Right? To what degree are we going to focus on innovating as opposed to executing brilliantly on what we have today? Financial results on a current basis versus investment for the future, right? So there's certain classic core trade-offs that general managers need to manage, and it's their responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the functional leaders to do that.
So the way you describe it there sounds like relatively complex, but basically you're managing trade-offs. How can an enterprise leader avoid falling into the trap of subjective integrative decision making. So I like you, I worked with you, before I got this promotion, you and I were big buddies, so I may be a little bit biased when I'm listening to your information in relation to someone else. How can I avoid falling into those subjective traps?
Well, I think you're most at risk of falling into those traps with regard to the function you come out of. I mean, I refer to this as your function of origin, right? It's kind of like your family of origin, and it influences you in surprisingly deep ways, and that can lead to some subjectivity, right? So you have to guard yourself, to not over-bias towards the direction of the stuff you love, whether it's operations or R&D or sales and marketing. I think that there's a few things that help, right? One is I think you do need to insist on data-driven leadership, for sure, right? You should always be asking the question, what does the data show? Can we get better information to help us make a good decision here? You also should always be asking what's right from the business as a whole. You should be pushing people on how do we get better, what's the learning curve so that we can do things more effectively. That said, subjectivity is never completely avoidable, right? When you get to the level of enterprise leadership, the decisions you're making involve a level of complexity and uncertainty and ambiguity. The data is never going to give you the right answer, or there may be multiple right answers, right? So in the end, you have to be exercising some judgment, and by definition, that's subjective. The key thing is just being aware of when you're doing that, and also being aware, as we just discussed, about the biases that you're possibly bringing to that discussion.
And what is the impact in terms of appetite for risk?
So really good, really interesting point. I think that one thing you see with first-time enterprise leaders is they often are somewhat risk-averse, right? And understandably, right? Because they're trying to learn about complex domains. They're making decisions that are pretty consequential. They don't want to break things right away. This is why typically you need really good advice when you're becoming an enterprise leader. And also thoughtful companies typically will not put you in situations where you necessarily need to make very high-risk decisions quickly. I've been writing recently about a gentleman who was put in a company that was basically a sort of sustaining success challenge with a very strong team, a relatively small business, right? I refer to these as playgrounds, right? A place where you can learn safely, and you're not going to bump up against anything that's too hard too soon.
You also mentioned in your work about this shift, you talk about the need to be able to manage in the white spaces. Can you tell us a little bit more what you mean by that?
Sure. So there are certain problems that don't fall necessarily neatly into any one function. It can be responsibility for scanning the external environment as a whole, right? And really understanding the many dimensions that are going on in the environment from a regulatory point of view, from a social point of view. It could be an issue like diversity, right? What does diversity mean? Diversity is not an HR issue, right? It's a human capital issue. It's also a cognitive diversity, issue. And so there are certain focal points where you can't expect your functional leaders to be raising those issues, right? To be really focusing necessarily a lot of attention on them individually. And those are the sorts of white spaces that I'm talking about.
Michael, thanks very much for giving us an overview today of that second shift moving from analyst to integrator. Thanks very much.